good evening, and welcome to our latest in conversation. And this evening we are talking to author Kate Lord-Brown. These events are free, but if you'd like to give a donation to Libraries Unlimited, which is the charity that runs the 54 libraries in Devon and Torbay, there is a link in the chat. We are posting to over 30 libraries this evening, from Ottery St Mary to Oakhampton. So hello to everybody who's watching at those libraries. And if you'd like to ask Kate a question, please pop it in the chat and I will ask Kate. So Kate was a finalist in the ITV's People's Author Contest, and her novel, The Perfume Garden, which has been published in 9 languages, was shortlisted for the Romantic Novel of the Year 2014. She was a regional winner of the BBC International Playwriting Competition this year, and she holds an MA in creative writing. Her books have been top sellers in the UK, Canada, and several European countries. And in 2020, she was highly commended in the RNA Elizabeth Gould Trophy. She also has written editorial reviews and regular columns. Actually, my computer has just decided to fling me down the things for Traveller, Condé Nast, Good Housekeeping, Blueprint, The Bookseller, Writers News, and many more. She wrote the first book column in the Middle East for 2 years, introducing a host of writers to the region through the pages of Halan. Is that how you say it? Halan?
It's like hello, basically.
Oh, is it?
Aslan.
After many years living abroad, she has decided to return to the wild and beautiful southwest England where she grew up. And Kate has 2 books out, which I have both of them here in 2021. We've got A Summer at the Castle, which we're going to be talking about this evening. And we can also talk about this one, because actually this one's got a lovely Christmassy cover, which is A Season of Secrets. So good evening, Kate, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Karen.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about A Summer at the Castle, and in fact you can tell us about A Season of Secrets as well if you would like to?
Absolutely. Well, should we start with Summer at the Castle, because I think that's the one that you've just read.
Yeah.
So this book is about a young chef who returns home to prove that she's a worthy heir to the family restaurant. But in order to take over the business, she's got to defeat both the man that she loves, who's the resident chef, and a ruthless rival. So Darcy Hughes has been living in California, working in restaurants out there. But she returns to Castle Drumquinna, which is on the beautiful sort of southwest coast of Ireland. And it's where her mother, Diana Hughes, has sort of established this kind of legendary restaurant. And Diana is the original and most formidable of all of the TV chefs. In my mind, I've sort of crossed Elizabeth David and Joanna Lumley. That's how I always that's how I always pictured her. But Diana has had an accident, and she realizes that even domestic goddesses need some help in the kitchen. So she wants to leave this legendary restaurant in really good hands, and she decides to have one final competition and record it as a fly-on-the-wall TV documentary at the castle. So Darcy will be competing with 2 chefs, Connor Ritchie, who's very much in the kind of Marco Pierre rock and roll chef mold. He's just come out of rehab. He's the resident Michelin-starred chef, so she's up against him. And she'll also be going up against ambitious newcomer Bee Lavender, who nobody really knows an awful lot about. And is it the restaurant? Is that all that Bee wants, or has she got an ulterior motive? And is Connor more interested in the restaurant or Darcy? So it's a story about food and desire, celebrity and obsession, and revenge. Because as secrets sort of come bubbling to the surface during the competition, the story interweaves a twin timeline. So you're switching between the 1960s and the present day. So really, poor old Darcy, she's a domestic goddess whose home life is hell, and the story really sees how she gets herself out of that.
I really love the book, and as I said, I've been sort of lied on the sofa this afternoon, finishing it off, and I really loved the setting. What inspired you to write the book in Ireland. And do you have any connection with where it's set, the castle, which I can't pronounce?
Drumquinna.
Yeah.
Well, I went there years and years ago when we were students, and it's such a beauty. I don't know if you've been to that.
I haven't been to Ireland, no.
But if you get the chance, just go. I mean, there's something really, really magical about that whole sort of Kerry area. And we stayed. It was quite run down then. It was called Drumquinna Manor, and it's now extremely beautiful. And it's a wonderful place to go and stay. So I'd said the location is there. The hotel is completely different. The restaurant is different. I hasten to add. But so I'd sort of tucked this location away in the back of my mind, and I thought, wow, I'd love to set a book there someday, because it's just so beautiful, and you know, there's so much material there with the location. So that was really the inspiration for the setting.
Have you been back since then, since you were a student? Have you been back recently to sort of so that you could research, or did you do it from memory?
I did it from memory because I was in the Middle East when I wrote this book.
Ah. Oh, right. Well, yeah, that's a little way to travel.
So, you know, thank goodness these days for Google Maps, and you know, I spoke to lots of people who live there and work there to get all those kind of little crafty details about sort of streets and rivers and locations. So it's amazing what you can do online, and you know, with the gift of memory as well.
Yeah, no, it would have been different if, well, going back to saying you said about the dual timeline, and back to 1969, it wouldn't have been possible to do the research by then. But I really enjoyed the dual timeline of the sort of the present with Darcy and Diana and Con, all in, you know, sort of, and B, we will come to B in a minute. But then back to 1969 and Colleen, and poor Colleen has I don't want to give too much away, but she does have a really awful life, doesn't she? And she blames herself for her husband, who is a sort of upstanding member of the community. Everybody sort of, it's sort of, you sort of allude to that people don't think that he's all that but he thinks he is, doesn't he? He thinks he's very much a sort of a upstanding member, and that everybody sort of looks up to him, and he's a doctor, but as a doctor's wife she should know her place, and it's not her fault, obviously. But was that difficult to write the sort of her sort of story, because it is quite traumatic, isn't it, in places?
Oh, very. You know, I mean, it's that old thing that you never quite know what's going on in a person's marriage.
Yeah.
The things that are hidden behind closed doors. And I think if you're writing scenes like that, you need to have done the groundwork, you need to do the research, you need to talk to people, and you know, you need to feel it as you're writing it, so that comes through to the reader, and hopefully that does. But yeah, it's very tough putting a lovely young girl through the things that she goes through.
And she really does, doesn't she? I mean, you know, she really, I mean, and it is, you know, there are parts of it which are, you know, difficult to read, because it is so, you know, she's a young girl, she's just had a baby.
Yeah.
And he's a brute, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know, for want of a better word. But yeah, so I think it's but the book is very balanced. I would say that you know, we'll talk about that a bit later on, but it's I don't want people to think that it's, you know, it's depressing, because it really isn't. It's very, it has difficult themes, but they are definitely balanced with the other beautiful scenery and the romance and all that. So it's also full of food, because we've got the cooking competition, we've got the restaurants. Do you like to cook? Is that your sort of inspiration? And we have a guest appearance from Elizabeth David early in the book. Is she an icon of yours?
Oh, completely. I got absolutely carried away. I did far too much research for this book, and I think I read everything that she'd ever written. And there's two wonderful biographies by Artemis Cooper and I can't remember the name of the other biographer, but they were magic, just to get all the sort of lovely. I mean, it's a chapter in the book, and I must have spent about 6 months reading.
I like that. I like lots of research, and she was. I mean, like you say, she's in the chapter, and she is iconic, isn't she? And you know, people who like food and you know, she's got her diaries, and I liked how sort of Darcy sort of does that in a modern day sort of, you know, with her blog. I thought I really liked that sort of, you know, connection of the sort of the old and the new, and I'm not going to give too much away about that, but there is a connection between that, isn't there, as well, later in the book.
Exactly, yeah. Because I think, you know, I think chefs, or, you know, certainly celebrity chefs now, they're working across so many different media platforms. You know, it's not just their cooking, it's not just the restaurant. They're, you know, they're writing the books, they're writing the blogs, the TV series. And I wanted to reflect that. I mean, I think you're always a bit careful about putting too much tech into a novel, because nothing dates it quicker than, you know.
No, definitely. And I think, you know, blogs have been around for a while now, haven't they? And I mean, they are sort of changing in a way, because I know like things like Instagram and TikTok and Reels and all those sorts of things. But I still think the written word is still, you know, people still like that, because, you know, images are great, but actually people want more information than an image. An image says a lot, but it doesn't give the, you know, the detail, does it? And
absolutely, yeah.
The characters are great. I really like the characters in the book, and I particularly like Darcy. I thought she was great, and I like her recipes in her blog, and I liked the sort of will they won't they with her and Con, which I'm not going to say will they won't they, you know. You'll have to read it and find out.
It's been a long time coming.
But B, as you said, B Lavender, she sort of pops up early in the book, doesn't she? She comes with her cakes and her and I laughed, because there's a bit in there where you say about I think it's Darcy, isn't it? So she doesn't like her sort of kitsy sort of bun tin and basket of
package,
but she, in the beginning when we first meet her, she's, you know, she is like all sweetness and light, but then things start to change, don't they, quite gradually, and Darcy notices it quite quickly, doesn't she? But other people don't.
I think like quite a lot of manipulative people, Bee's extremely charming. I mean, I've described her as looking like Julie Andrews with the heart of Machiavelli. She's a very bright cookie, and she's very ambitious, and she wants to go places.
It doesn't I mean, even in the sort of first few chapters, she, you know, she's got this long hair, hasn't she? And she like literally chops it all off because someone makes a comment. And I was like, whoa, that's quite out there. But actually that becomes more and more, you know, sort of apparent as the book goes on. You sort of find out why she's like that. And she is, like you say, she's very driven, isn't she? And I think that sort of celebrity, that side of celebrity, isn't it, of that sort of them just trying to, you know, everybody trying to win, and it's quite, it can be brutal.
It can be, you know. I think, you know, that degree of obsession is a really interesting thing. And I mean, I've always loved the sort of, you know, domestic noir films like Hand That Rocked the Cradle or Single White Female, Fatal Attraction, all those kind of 80s 90s blockbusters that we all grew up on. And I wanted to sort of inject that little sort of hint of darkness into the story, and hopefully the balance is right.
And I think that's the thing we were saying about Colleen and Timothy, is, you know, that is quite dark, isn't it, you know, that side of it. But then you have the other side, which is not dark, and I like that in a book, because I think it's nice to read a book that's all lovely. But I think to have some depth, but you do need something a bit gritty in the background, don't you? Because you don't want to, as a reader, I don't want to guess everything that's going to happen. I like to be surprised on the way, no matter what the genre is, really.
Absolutely. You know, I think it's like a meal, isn't it? You know, it needs to be, it's got to have that seasoning and depth to it.
Definitely. I've got a question, actually, for, I don't know if it's a question or a comment from Deborah. So Deborah says, The Perfume Garden and The Beauty Chorus are two of my favourite books, and I'm looking forward to reading A Summer at the Castle.
Oh, thank you, Deborah.
So I haven't read the other two. So the Perfume Garden, was that the one that you won the prize for?
That was again, it was a twin timeline, set around the time of 9/11, and then flashing back to the Spanish Civil War.
Oh wow.
Um, and it was
Do you
about,
enjoy that sort of, do you enjoy writing the two timelines? Is that something
I
that,
do, yeah,
yeah,
because I think I'm very interested in the kind of ripple effects of these huge events in history
yeah,
and how it impacts on individual lives. And I think if if you have enough scope in a book, either sort of very long linear story or a quite focused twin timeline, you can really see that the sort of shock effects through the years.
yeah,
And
and
that's an interesting thing to play with.
it is, and also I think you can sort of go back to the time, isn't it? So actually, interestingly, I didn't know that Le Creuset was around, and I mean, I hadn't sort of assumed that it was, one of the things that Colleen's got her precious Le Creuset pan, isn't it? And that's what she goes to Elizabeth Day to get another one.
And it's
And
all
I was
it's
like,
all thanks to her. It's all thanks to Elizabeth David. I've got downstairs on the kitchen shelves a wonderful, when Le Creuset was like the new thing, along with sort of olive oil and Italian cooking and all of
yeah,
these wonderful things that Elizabeth David brought in. Le Creuset actually put out a sort of very thin cookbook with her, which is quite hard to get hold of. But I was lucky enough to get my hands on a copy.
I know we've got quite a lot of Elizabeth David books down in our stack in Exeter Library. I know I've taken the bread one out a few times. My husband was looking at bread, but she really did go into real detail, didn't she? With do you like to tell us a bit more about, because you did 6 months worth of research? Would you like to sort of, for people who are watching who maybe don't know who she is?
Well, I mean, if you think back to the sort of context of when she was around and started writing, that sort of grey 1950s post-war era England, when you'd have your sort of liver and bacon or sort of milky tea, and it was just Technicolor. Her books just brought in this kind of wonderful Mediterranean lifestyle that people hadn't really experienced en masse in the UK in the way that we've, until recently, we've been able to travel very easily and enjoy, sort of exploring Italy and France. So, I mean, as we said earlier, she's iconic, and I think she's had an extraordinary personal life, very interesting life, but she's also a very beautiful writer.
And they're more than just, I mean, we were talking about, you were saying about celebrity chefs and things now, and they do their books, but they were big, weren't they? The bread one's huge. I mean, it's a big book. She went into huge detail with it. It wasn't just like, this is the recipe, off you go. It was like the whole sort of process behind that. And
absolutely, no, incredible. Very, very well researched and very scholarly. And they haven't really been bettered, I don't think.
No, and I know that people like Nigella Lawson and other celebrity cooks sort of, they will always sort of refer back to her books, because I guess that she was the sort of the forefront of bringing international cooking into our country, like you say, after the sort of austere sort of post-war times where people were just coming out of rations. And I know Colleen says, doesn't she, in the book about getting the garlic, isn't it? And like the husband is like, no, I don't want any of that sort of
that look.
Yeah.
Well, I think, because I mean, Colleen was going up to Soho, wasn't she, to get the ingredients?
Yeah.
I think in those days you get olive oil in tiny bottles from a chemist, because it was seen as something medicinal rather than culinary.
Something you cooked with, definitely.
Yeah.
And we said earlier on about that you the glamour of the castle. I really loved that, the sort of when sort of Darcy comes out in the wedding dress, because Diana's decided that they're going to do weddings, and she really does. She is a real sort of tour de force, isn't she, Diana? She's really sort of but she wants to hand over the castle to we don't know who she's going to hand the castle over to, but she's sort of saying that she wants it to be in safe hands. She wants but she's got lots of ideas. And I also liked the sort of romance with her and Fergus. It's Fergus, isn't it? Her and Fergus have, so that the older sort of that she's sort of lost her husband, but now she's sort of found somebody else that she wants to sort of have fun with, and I really like that side of it. What gave you the idea of sort of putting the cooking show and the sort of the sort of all in the competition? Was it sort of, were you inspired by Bake Off at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's again because I was in the Middle East. We were living there for sort of 10 years or so, and the only contact with home, often for sort of, a couple of years at a time, you'd flick on BBC World in the evening, and Bake Off gets everywhere, and MasterChef gets everywhere. So it was like a lovely, you used to have it on in the background when you were working, and I was quite curious because seeing it from a sort of distance. This phenomenon that was sort of sweeping across, I was thinking, that's really interesting. Everybody's just gone mad for baking suddenly. It seemed quite curious from a distance because you're not sort of living it every day. So I looked at all of the competitions sort of through the history of televised cooking, and hopefully it's not too much Bake Off. There's a little bit more sort of MasterChef thrown in. It was just an interesting thing seeing this whole phenomenon take off from a distance.
Because I mean, years ago, everybody baked, didn't they? And I think lockdown was another example of when everybody went baking mad. Which I think we before this, but it's sort of years ago, it was something that was my gran and they just baked as normal. It was a normal thing to do. But I think bringing sort of people like Mary Berry and the lady, the one who does it now, is it Prue?
Oh, Prue.
Yeah. So I was thinking, I sort of thought that Diana sort of reminded me a bit of a cross between Prue and Mary.
Yeah,
Prue and Mary hybrid.
Diana's a real sort of force of nature, I think.
So did you so that side of it, the sort of the glamour and the celebrity, and then you sort of balance that because Connor is a recovering alcoholic, and we've obviously got domestic violence. And how did you sort of balance that? Because it's tricky, isn't it, to get the balance of not too dark, not too light, sort of in the middle. How did you sort of weave those together?
Well, I think writing, because I'm writing historical fiction, but it's historical romance. I think there's an expectation that no matter how bleak the story becomes, there will be a sort of, if not a happily ever after, that there'll be an upwards trajectory for the character. So I think that comes, you write the story, but then in the plotting, you want to have a sort of good rhythm to it. So I think if you're having a sort of quite a distressing scene, say with Colleen, you want to balance that with something lighter so that the reader feels safe rather than traumatized.
Have a break, because otherwise it can be a bit traumatic if you have really horrific scenes. But it definitely worked like that for me. There was dark bits and I was like, oh, that's dark. But then you go back into the sort of the wedding, or the dressing up for the wedding, or the the sort of the television guy who's doing and there's humor as well. It's funny, and there's bits of sort of but and Connor's sort of he's been a very high pressure chef, hasn't he? He's sort of his marriage has broken down because he I won't give away, but he was a bit naughty, and then he ends up in rehab. But he's got a child from this marriage, and he's sort of trying to pick his life up. And Darcy's come home because of what happened. She's sort of had her romance and life has sort of broken up. She's come home as well, so they've all sort of come back to roost, haven't they, at the castle, with Diana as an unlikely mother hen, I think.
I don't know. I've always loved stories with the sort of big, messy, bohemian, the kind of Cazalet, Elizabeth Jane Howard's, Mary Wesley's families. I like these big, not necessarily related by blood, but this
looking sort of after each other,
messy family units, and the way that everybody interacts and falls back in, and just seeing how they all sort of resolve the relationship. I find people just endlessly fascinating.
I mean, they you talk quickly just then about plotting, and are you a plotter or a pantser?
Bit of both.
Oh,
a little bit of both. I think I write longhand. The first draft is always longhand.
Wow. Not many of you like that. Jill Mansell, she still writes. She writes all hers in fountain pen.
William Boyd, I think, writes his longhand and keeps them in a fridge, apparently. So I've heard.
In a fridge?
Yeah, because I suppose if you had a fire, it's a very safe place.
Yeah, I
Isn't it?
guess
If you
so.
just got one.
Yeah, because I mean that would be, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. If there was a fire, that's it all gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's not think about that.
No.
So I start writing the story longhand, and that's really, it's almost like transcribing a cinematic film in your head.
Yeah.
So as the story starts coming, you get these snatches of conversation, and you start getting a glimpse of the characters. But then, because I write historical fiction, I'm very careful that the research is
Yeah.
bang on. So for me, it's like the skeleton of the story, the framework of the story. So that's the planning part, really.
Yeah.
Once I know what I need to know, I go and I read up on that, because I think you can always tell in historical fiction if somebody's just like shoehorned in every single thing that they've researched over the last 2 or 3 years, because they're not going to waste a scrap of the things that they found out. And you don't want to do that. I mean, you're telling a story at the end of the day, and you want people to be entertained and and hopefully find out these amazing bits of forgotten history that certainly I'd never heard about before starting to write the book. So it's an element of the two, because I think when I'm writing, at least I like to be surprised by the characters, and I like to give them that kind of stage and fresh air so that they can grow and change. And if you just think about somebody like Connor, he's a sort of classic bad boy.
Yeah.
I think that's quite an interesting story, seeing how a bad boy becomes a good man.
Yeah.
Just that journey within the book.
And I quite like that. I hadn't thought about him as Marco Pierre White, actually. I don't know who I hadn't actually got him in my head as a person, but I can see that now. I can see that sort of, that sort of, say sort of rock and roll chef, and I mean, a lot of it, I guess, is burnout as well, because they work exceedingly long hours, don't they? And it's really stressful. And so yeah, you can see why that sort of, why it comes in to the whole picture of it, and why it's not, so unusual. Are you working on anything at the moment? What or have you written anything at the moment? Are you writing something at the moment?
Yeah, constantly writing. I've got one book that I finished during lockdown, which I'm just going through a last edit on, and it's a World War II romance set in North Devon.
Oh, great!
In the 1940s, and it's about a family of women, basically, because obviously all the men are off at war.
Yeah.
And the relationships and the stories that they have during World War II up on the north coast of Devon.
That sounds fascinating.
So yeah, I hope, cross fingers, it's the last edit on that one. That's been, because it's a twin timeline again, so that's been quite a complex story to write. And I've just started writing something contemporary for a complete change of pace, set in London in the 1990s. So I suppose that's almost historical, actually, isn't it? But
well, I don't like to think about that, but yes, it is. That sort of genre, is it romance again, or is it moving away from that, or has it got romance at its roots? Or
there's some romance in there, but I think the contemporary one, it's far more a kind of coming of age story. I think that's quite an interest. I haven't looked at that sort of period in somebody's life, that moment when you're just launching off into adulthood, and navigating all of the things that happen to people when they come up to London from the middle of nowhere. At sort of 1920. So it's quite fun. I'm enjoying that one.
Yeah, that sounds really good, because you've had a very varied writing career, as we sort of alluded to at the beginning of the and is writing a novel very different from your sort of day-to-day sort of, you do journalistic work, don't you? And is that very different?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I've written on huge amount of different topics. I wrote, as you said earlier, the first book club column in the Middle East for 2 years, which was great fun. That was sort of reviewing 4 or 5 books every couple of weeks. So a lot of reading, that was a sort of fairly quick turnaround. And I think it's quite satisfying having small chunks of research and getting articles written quickly out there, and then they're published, days, weeks later. I think psychologically it's quite good to get your work up and out there, because a novel, I mean, the one that I'm just editing, I started in 2017.
Wow.
So I started reading for it, what is that? Really don't want to think about it. 4 or 5 years ago. But, it's a long gestation, I think, for a novel. And in theory, you're producing a book a year, but you've got lots of ideas at different stages. So there's shorter journalistic pieces, learn something or interview somebody or whatever, and get it up and out. I enjoy doing those.
Did you when you do you write more than one? Can you write more than one book at a time? Because you're obviously editing at the moment, and you said the other one has been. So you obviously, is that difficult when you've got a couple on the go together, not to get muddled or have ideas that cross? And
I think yes. I mean, it depends really. I think I wouldn't ever write 2 similar books at the same time. I think you would end up having a sort of hybrid.
Yeah.
You'd have characters trotting across from one screen to the other. But I think writing something completely different, that's fine. It's like holding different universes in your mind.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about, because you said about Elizabeth Jane Howard and those sort of serial, have you ever sort of thought about, writing something that, that's sort of, is more than one book? Because at the moment you're standalones, aren't they? So
yeah.
Is that something that you would like to do, or is it like, I'll just do the one at a time?
I think, I've written outlines for a couple of sequels to 1 or 2 of the books.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, some of the characters, once you finish writing the book, that's it, they've gone from your mind, and then other ones just linger around. I mean, I suppose it's like friendships, some people stay with you.
Yeah.
And some people come into your life for a short time and then go. So yeah, I've got outlines for a couple of sequels, and I think possibly the contemporary one that I'm writing at the moment, that would be quite interesting to take it forward as a series of books.
Because you must get sort of you must be connected to the characters and like some of them. Maybe not all of them. But some of them you must get sort of attached to, and so I can see why people do carry on and want to write series about.
Definitely. And I think when you're dealing with such a young character as well, you've just got all of that life ahead to see how they change and progress. And I think every novel is a journey, really, isn't it? You want to see people change, and you want to see where they go.
Definitely. I've got another question that's come in from Ali, who says that she loved A Summer at the Castle. Thank you. She also loved The House of Dreams, and she said a huge amount of research must have gone into that. A fascinating slice of history that she knew nothing about.
Oh, thank you, Ali. That was an amazing book to research. It was set in Marseille during World War II, and it's really the story of the artist Schindler. I mean, again, it was a piece of history that I had never come across. And I was researching I studied art history. That was my first degree. And while I was doing the research for the thesis on the surrealist painters, I kept on seeing this name, Varian Fry. I was thinking, that's a really interesting, almost like music. And it popped up again a few years ago when I was, looking for a subject. I always thought at the back of my mind I'd quite like to write a novel based on the artist that I'd studied academically.
Yeah.
And it turns out this guy was the artist Schindler. He was an American journalist who came over to Marseille in 1940, and he and a small sort of ragtag, again, a sort of bohemian family of activists, spirited all of these artists and intellectuals out from what they called it the greatest man trap in history, and they were responsible for saving all these incredible people. And during the research, I found the name of the youngest person involved, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if he was still alive, because he lied about his age at the time.
Wow.
And said that he was much older, but he was only, he was a terribly young teenager.
Mm.
And it turned out that he's now an emeritus professor at Bard in the States.
Oh, wow.
So I managed to, I contacted him and said, would you mind talking to me? And I had all of these wonderful late night Skype conversations from America to the Middle East. And he just gave me all of these magic details that you can't find in the history books, about what it was really like to be there. So it was a great, it's just an enormous privilege hearing these stories.
That sounds amazing. I love art history myself. My degree was partly art history, which I absolutely loved. So
okay.
I shall definitely be looking at that one. So I'm just looking at the time, and we're nearly at the end, and it's gone so quickly. But what have you enjoyed reading recently, Kate? And do you recommend anything that you've read to our watchers this evening?
Absolutely. Well, I've read quite a lot during lockdown, probably like lots of people. I think one of my favourite books that I've come across recently, I don't know if you've read any Tessa Hadley.
I have read Tessa Hadley. I haven't read that one though.
Past. This was one that I read just at the end of summer and completely fell in love with her voice. And there's just a credible sort of elegance to her writing that I really, really admire. It's about 4 siblings who go back to the family home to try and, sort out clearing out the old house. And it's set sort of during a very kind of hot summer, so it was the perfect time to read it.
Yeah.
And it's about all the interconnected relationships and how things fall apart and then come back together again. But I was just blown away by how wonderful her writing is, and immediately went out and bought, another couple of books to read. So I just, I love that when I don't know how I haven't come across her before, but when you find a writer, you just think, that, so that was my find of the summer.
That's great. We've I know we have a lot of her books in the library, and it's really great when you find an author that you haven't discovered before, and they've got several books that because there's nothing worse than finding one and that's like this at their first, and then you have to catch up. I am quite often catching up, so I quite like that when you sort of got 3 or 4 or 5, 6 to read.
I know. I'm reading at the moment. I'm reading Meg Mason.
Oh, I've got that one to read, and
you're in for a real treat. I enjoyed this so much that I'm listening to the audiobook in the car as well. But I'm trying to limit it because I think, has she written one other book apart from this?
I don't know. I remember that one. That was again out in the summer, wasn't it? And it was everywhere, and it's really, really, everybody loves it. So I've been sort of savouring it because I know that once I've read it, you can't read it again. That's always the hard thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
That are amazing.
I have to wait for the next one.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kate. And the Summer at the Castle is out now, and also we didn't actually get around to talking about a season for Secrets, but this one is again set on an estate, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Estate. So that looks like a perfect sort of hot chocolate on the sofa book to read.
Curl up by the fire.
Yeah. Tomorrow evening, we've got another In Conversation, and it is with Mary Colson Ellis, and we're going to be talking about her book Emily Noble's Disgrace. So if you'd like to join us at 7 o'clock tomorrow on our Facebook Live, we will be here. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Kate, for joining us, and good luck with the book. And we'll look forward to maybe you could come into the library and talk to us about the North Devon one when it's out.
I'd love to.
That would be great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.